My cheating wife thought I would forgive her. She believed that everything would end well, that after the betrayal we could start over. That our marriage, the nights of affection, her touch on my skin and the familiar smell on the pillow would be enough to make me forget what she did. That somehow I would be the same submissive man she had manipulated all this time, willing to ignore her infidelity and move on. She looked at me as if she still had some power over me. The confidence on her face told me one thing: she thought I would forgive her. But she was mistaken. I clearly remember the day everything fell apart. It was a morning like any other, but for me, it was the beginning of the end. That day would change my life forever. While everyone around me went about their days, carefree, I was sitting in my car, trying to absorb the reality that was forced upon me. The laughter, the holding hands, the passionate looks. Everything I believed I had, all the happiness I felt, was based on a lie. A brutal betrayal that crushed my heart and left a void where there once was love and trust. "How could you do this to me?" I asked, trying to understand. She just looked down, avoiding my eyes, and her silence screamed more than any lame excuse she could come up with. The embarrassment and regret were only evident because she was caught, not because she felt true remorse. Her face was a mixture of guilt and despair. I didn't want to hurt you," she said, as if that made any difference, as if her empty words had the power to mend what was broken. But for me, there weren't enough excuses in the world to explain what she did. At first, everything was covered by a mask of normality. The affectionate messages, the nights of passion, the plans for the future. I thought we were a happy couple. An example for everyone around us. However, little by little, the signs began to appear: phone calls at odd hours, disguised smiles while typing messages on your cell phone, lame excuses for staying late at work. Intuition told me something was wrong, but I ignored it. After all, who wants to believe that they are being betrayed by the one they love? It was a text message that revealed the secret. A message sent by mistake, as if it were a cruel joke of fate, that made me understand everything. I read and reread those words, trying to find some other meaning, some logical explanation. But there was no doubt. The betrayal was there, wide open in front of me. And at that moment, I knew nothing would be the same again. The ground disappeared beneath my feet. The trust one had built for years was destroyed in seconds. She tried to explain it to me. Her every word felt like a knife blow, every apology a new wound. I could hear the hesitation in his voice, the desperate attempt to make it seem like everything was under control, that this was just a mistake, something in the past that we could overcome. "It was a moment of weakness," she said, trying to hold my hands, as if that contact could erase what she did. "But how can you erase the image of her with another man from your memory? How can I forget the nights she spent with him while I, naive, waited for her at home?" The worst part was realizing that she truly believed I would forgive. She thought I was weak, that the love I felt was so great that I would swallow my pride, accept her betrayal and we would move on. That I would leave everything behind, sweep the dirt under the rug and pretend it never happened. But what she didn't know was that while she thought I was trying to process everything in silence, I was planning something much bigger. I was plotting my revenge. And so, the perfect opportunity arose. A social event, where all our friends would be present. She, dressed with her best smile, tried to keep up appearances, as if she were a dedicated and loving wife. And I, with my blood boiling, remained calm, waiting for the right moment. "Do you really think I'll forgive?" I whispered to her as all eyes were on us. She froze, trying to hide it, trying to convince me to wait, to work things out in private. But there was no turning back. I was decided. In the middle of the party, with all the curious eyes on us, I revealed the truth. I told everyone about the betrayal, about the lies, about the charade she put on every day. With every word I said, I could see the color draining from his face. She looked around, desperate, looking for a friendly face, an excuse, a way out. But there wasn't. "It was your karma," the result of your choices. And I savored every second. The shock on her face, the tears that flowed and the guests' whispers of amazement echoed like music to my ears. It was at that moment that she realized that I was not the man she thought I would be. I wouldn't forgive her, I wouldn't ignore her, I wouldn't sweep anything under the rug. Not this time. I won't forgive you. I don't want to resolve this in private. You chose to cheat, and now, you're paying the price, I declared, as the guests looked on, stunned, trying to process the avalanche of truths that had just been thrown at them. She tried to stop me, tried to hold my arm, but I just pushed her away. I knew that would be the end of us. And I wanted her to feel every second of her mistake. That night, everything she thought she had, her security, her status, everyone's respect, collapsed like a house of cards. I left her alone. I took everything. I left only emptiness, loneliness, and the weight of your own betrayal. But the truth is that, after everything, the feeling of revenge did not fill the void that remained. There was still something that tormented me, something I couldn't forget, something I needed to know. After all, when did she stop loving me? When did everything start to fall apart and I was the only one who didn't notice? That's the question that haunted me night after night, and the answer, well, that's the last piece I still haven't been able to find. But one thing I know for sure, she never imagined that her betrayal would have such a high price. Welcome to the channel. Here, betrayal is never supported or romanticized. Our stories, although fictional, have a mission, to show how betrayal can devastate lives and leave deep scars. Get ready to hear a shocking and engaging story that will keep you hooked from start to finish. Good story. Morning began to dawn on the streets of Boston, with the cold wind cutting through the corners and the lights in the buildings slowly going out. Richard was standing on the balcony of his apartment, taking in the view. The city he knew so well seemed peaceful, unlike the chaos his life was about to become. But at that moment, he still believed he had everything under control. He was a successful man, owner of a growing financial consulting company, and married to the woman he thought was the love of his life, Emily. Richard and Emily's marriage was, in everyone's eyes, the picture of perfection. Both young, beautiful, intelligent, and always together at all important social events. To their friends and family, they were the couple everyone wanted to be. There were laughs, there were intimate dinners, planned trips, and the complicity that only years of coexistence can build. It was the perfect life. Or at least, it seemed to be. Emily was a charismatic, sweet, and energetic woman. She had left her career as a lawyer to take care of the house, the charitable projects she loved so much and, of course, Richard. She was the ideal hostess for her husband's business dinners, knew how to keep a conversation light and interesting, and seemed to be any successful man's dream woman. Richard never had any doubt that she was by his side, unconditionally. He felt like there was something special about the way she looked at him, like he was the center of her world, and it made him feel invincible. When he came home after a long day of work, Emily was always there, with a smile on her face, a glass of wine in hand, and ready to listen to him talk about the day's challenges. It was a comfortable life and, for Richard, a life he never imagined could fall apart. However, there were nuances that Richard never allowed himself to notice. The way Emily seemed to always be busy with something new. A new yoga class, a reading group that began to meet weekly, small weekend getaways to find yourself again. Richard saw all of this as her way of seeking happiness and balance, which seemed completely normal to him. We all need time for ourselves, he thought. And since he spent hours on end immersed in reports and spreadsheets, Emily's occasional absence was easy to ignore. For him, it just meant that they were both busy building their lives, and that the solid foundation of their marriage would not be affected by these small changes. But beneath the surface, things were more complex. Emily, who was previously completely transparent, had gradually changed. She started spending more time outside, investing in herself, as she said, and Richard supported her. He liked to see her happy and never wanted to be that kind of controlling husband. She, in turn, reinforced how much she admired him, how proud she was of his career. When she saw him leaving in a suit and tie for another important meeting, Emily always made a point of saying, "You're the most incredible man I've ever met." These words filled Richard with pride, as if they were a constant reminder that his dedication was being appreciated and that his marriage was stronger than ever. Business dinners, however, began to change. Before, Emily was always present, helping to keep the atmosphere relaxed and actively participating in conversations. But lately, she had made excuses to miss it. Sometimes it was a sudden migraine, sometimes a social commitment with friends he had never met. "I'm just going to bother you businessmen," she said, laughing, as if her absence was a natural thing. Richard forced himself not to bother. After all, it was just one night, and Emily was always there when he came home. What he didn't know was that these absent nights hid more than just social commitments. A common scene in their apartment, Richard arriving late, the sound of the front door echoing through the hallway, the smell of home-cooked food still hanging in the air. Emily appeared in the living room, in a bathrobe, and with that usual look in her eyes. "Hi, love. How was your day?" he asked, giving her a warm kiss. That kiss that seemed full of love and security. Richard told her about the challenges at work, the strategic decisions he needed to make, and she listened, with attention and tenderness. "You work too much, you know that. You should take some time for us," she said, caressing his face, as he settled down on the sofa. Richard felt that was exactly what he wanted to hear, words that sounded like unconditional support. Despite this, there were times when Emily seemed distant, even when she was physically present. His gaze, at times, seemed to get lost somewhere beyond the room, as if he were somewhere else, living another life. Richard would ask her if everything was okay, and she would always respond with the same carefree smile. "Just tired," he said, quickly changing the subject. And Richard, because he trusted her blindly, never questioned it. He didn't want to be that insecure, paranoid husband. He believed that marriage was a trusting partnership and, therefore, never even considered that something could be wrong. One weekend, Richard proposed that they travel together to escape their routine. "Let's go to Cape Cod, just the two of us, how about that?" Emily seemed excited about the idea, but soon came up with an excuse. A friend needed help organizing a charity event, and she had already promised. Richard accepted the answer without question, although he was a little disappointed. The idea of a romantic weekend by the sea seemed perfect, but he swallowed the discomfort and let it go. Emily seemed really involved in volunteer work, and Richard knew she felt fulfilled doing it. So, he decided not to pressure her. And so, once again, the distance between them grew a little more. Their apartment, with its walls decorated with photos of travel and happy times, felt like a capsule of memories that Richard clung to. He liked to look through the photos while he ate breakfast, remembering the sunny days in Italy, the nights in Paris, the spontaneous drives along the East Coast. Each image told a story, a happy memory. And he was eager to add more to that collection. He was planning a surprise trip for her birthday, something that could rekindle that flame that he felt was a little extinguished. Richard tried hard to keep romanticism alive. "I reserved special nights, tried to make surprises." On one of those nights, he decided to cook a special dinner. He prepared Emily's favorite dish and set the table with candles, wine and everything he thought would make the night unforgettable. When she arrived, she seemed surprised, but something in her expression showed discomfort. She quickly covered it up, forced a smile and sat down at the table, but Richard felt something was wrong. Still, he ignored that feeling. The night went on, they talked, they laughed and, for a moment, everything seemed to be fine. But Richard couldn't shake the feeling that there was an invisible barrier between them. "Are you happy?" he asked one night as they lay in bed. Emily turned to him, caressed his face and smiled. "Of course I am. What about you?" He smiled back and kissed her. "More than ever," he replied, believing his own words, holding on to that feeling, hoping it was true. For Richard, life was going well. He had everything he ever dreamed of, a successful career, a loving wife, and a stable life. But there was an invisible tension that was beginning to envelop the couple. A tension that Richard couldn't name, but that Emily knew all too well. And while he lived in the comfort of the illusion that everything was perfect, a storm was silently approaching, ready to destroy the life he knew. And so, the seeds of betrayal were sown. But what would come next? Little could Richard imagine that he would soon be forced to confront the unvarnished truth about his perfect marriage. A truth that would change his life forever. The weeks that followed brought more changes to Richard and Emily's routine. She continued to subtly withdraw, with the usual excuses, charity events, meetings with friends, yoga classes. Richard tried to rationalize everything, telling himself that it was just a phase, that soon she would be the same as she always was. But an uneasiness began to grow within him. Small details began to catch his attention, things that had previously gone unnoticed. The way she dressed up more than usual to go out in the afternoon, the furtive way she put away her cell phone when she realized he was looking. There was something hidden behind her smile, a shadow he couldn't name. And that made him uncomfortable, disturbed. On a cloudy Saturday afternoon, Richard was sitting in his office at home when he heard Emily talking on the phone in the hallway. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but he could catch fragments of the conversation. No. Not today, later, his heart skipped a beat. He had never distrusted his wife before, but the way she spoke at that moment, so far from her usual warm and caring tone, made him freeze. He tried not to give it too much importance, but those words kept echoing in his mind, and that's when he decided to investigate further. That night, while Emily slept next to him, Richard took her cell phone. He hesitated for a moment, feeling like he was invading the privacy of the woman he loved. But doubt burned in his chest like a living flame. He took a deep breath and slid his finger across the device, until he found what appeared to be a messaging app he didn't recognize. Richard had never been a controlling man, but right now, he needed to know. With trembling fingers, he opened the app and saw messages that made him take his breath away. Today was wonderful. I can't wait to be together again, said one of the messages. His heart was beating so hard he could barely hear his own thoughts. His hands started to sweat, and he had to control himself not to throw his cell phone away. The message left no doubt, and his world seemed to spin. Each word was like a cutting blade, and the realization of what was happening began to slowly form in his mind, like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. Over the next few days, Richard felt trapped in a whirlwind of emotions. He continued to act as if everything was normal, but his gaze on Emily had changed. Every time she left the house, every time she laughed on the phone or went out to meet a friend, he felt like he was losing another part of her, another part of the marriage he thought was unbreakable. He needed to know the truth, needed to be sure of what was happening. It was then that he decided to follow her. One afternoon, Emily went out saying she was going to help a friend with a charity event. Richard, with his heart racing and the feeling that he was about to discover something that would change his life forever, waited for her to leave and discreetly followed her in the car. He kept a safe distance, breathing deeply and trying to remain calm. It's just to get this crazy idea out of my head, I thought, even though I knew something was very wrong. After a few minutes of chasing, Richard saw her stop in front of a small restaurant. She got out of the car, fixed her hair, and, when he thought she was just meeting a friend, he saw him. A younger, taller man with dark hair and a confident smile was waiting for her at the door of the restaurant. The two hugged each other, in a way that left no doubt about the type of relationship they had. And then he kissed her. A long, deep, passionate kiss. At that moment, Richard knew there was no longer any way to deny the truth. His body froze. He wanted to get out of the car, run to them, confront them right there. But a feeling of humiliation stopped him. He stood there, just observing, as if he were outside his own body, watching the scene from afar, without reacting. His hands gripped the steering wheel so hard he felt his knuckles hurt. His breathing was heavy, each inhale felt like a monumental effort, and his mind was blank. How could she do this to me, he thought, unable to believe what his eyes were seeing. The two entered the restaurant, and Richard remained in the car, motionless. Every part of his life seemed to fall apart around him. What else hadn't he seen? How long had she been lying? All those nights of volunteer work, all those hidden messages, it all made sense now. The marriage he thought was perfect was, in fact, a well-told lie. He stood there, looking at the restaurant door, trying to find the courage to act, to do anything. But the weight of what he had discovered left him paralyzed. Richard returned home that night without saying a word. The house was empty, cold, as if the spirit of their marriage had left along with the kiss he saw at the restaurant door. He knew he needed to confront her, knew he needed to demand an explanation. But at that moment, the pain and anger consumed him completely. He closed the bedroom door, lay down on the bed he used to share with her and stared at the ceiling, thinking about all the times he had ignored his instincts, all the times he blindly trusted Emily. And while she was still out, laughing and drinking and enjoying another man's company, Richard thought about how this was just the beginning. Because if she thought he would be able to forgive, she was about to discover that she didn't know the man standing next to her. That night, Richard sat on the couch, staring into the empty room, thinking about what to do next. Betrayal was eating him up inside. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Emily kissing that man at the restaurant door, and every time he tried to push the image away, it came back with more force. His head was racing, and he knew it was impossible to move forward without confronting her, without throwing everything on the table and extracting the truth, no matter how painful it was. What he didn't know, however, was that the pain was just beginning. When Emily got home that night, Richard was waiting. The silence that enveloped the environment was almost palpable, dense, as if the air was charged with tension. She entered smiling, as she always did, but when she saw his face, her smile instantly fell. "What happened?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady, but with a look like he knew something was wrong. Richard watched her for a moment, trying to find words to express the chaos taking over his mind, but all that came out was a dry, direct question: "Who were you with today?" Emily froze. For a second, her face seemed to lose all color, but she quickly covered it up. "What are you talking about?" he replied, with false innocence, giving a nervous laugh. Richard stood up, walking towards her. "I saw you, Emily," he said, the words coming out between his teeth. "I followed you to the restaurant. I saw you with him." Her face contorted in despair and panic. She knew she couldn't hide it anymore, but she still tried to cling to any excuse. "Richard, please let me explain," she said, her voice shaking. "It was a mistake, I was confused, But Richard interrupted her. "Confused?" he shouted, feeling the words boil in his mouth. "Were you confused while kissing another man? While you lied to me, night after night, pretending everything was okay?" Emily started to cry, tears streaming down her face. She seemed like a broken woman, desperate to find something that could justify her actions, but knowing that nothing she said would be enough. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I never wanted to hurt you, Richard. I love you, I swear, but—" Richard interrupted her again, this time with a coldness that he himself was unaware of. "But you betrayed me, Emily. You destroyed our marriage. Everything we built together, all the love, all the trust, you threw it all away. And why? Who is he?" For a moment, Emily seemed unable to respond. She looked at the floor, as if she was trying to find the courage to tell the truth, but the words wouldn't come out. Richard couldn't believe what he was seeing. The woman he loved, who he thought he knew so well, was there, standing in front of him, her eyes full of guilt and regret. And that made him even angrier. "Who is he, Emily?" he shouted again, his voice echoing off the walls of the room. "Tell me the truth, now." She took a deep breath and finally found her voice. It's Adam, he whispered, barely audible. Richard frowned. Adam. A name that meant nothing to him. Adam, he asked, trying to understand. Who the hell is Adam? Emily hesitated, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. He works with me at the charity event, he began. We met a few months ago, and things just happened. I didn't plan any of this, I never wanted it to be like this, Richard, but... She stopped, unable to continue. Richard was still, trying to process what he was hearing. Are you saying that you destroyed our marriage for a guy you met a few months ago? For a stranger who appeared in your life and made you forget everything we lived together? Emily began to shake her head in despair. It's not like that, Richard, she said, trying to find the right words. I was feeling alone. You were always busy with work, with your career. I felt left out, invisible. And Adam, he made me feel alive again. Richard laughed bitterly. Invisible, he repeated. I worked all these years to give you a good life, to make you happy, and now you're saying I made you invisible. Is that an excuse to cheat, to lie, to throw away all those years we spent together? He was so overcome with rage that he could barely hear what he was saying. Her every word seemed to only make the situation worse, as if she were pouring salt into an open wound. Emily tried to get closer, holding his arm. I don't know what to say, Richard, she said, her voice full of despair. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But I want to make it right. I want to save our marriage. But Richard was beyond forgiveness. He pushed her lightly, moving away from her touch. Save what, Emily? He shouted. Do you think I'll be able to look at you again without remembering what you did? Do you think I'll be able to sleep next to you knowing you were in bed with another man? There's no way to fix that. Silence took over the room for a moment, only Emily's sobs broke the tension. Richard stared at her, feeling a mixture of hatred and sadness that he never imagined possible. The love he felt for her was there, but it was suffocated by betrayal, disappointment, humiliation. I'm leaving home tomorrow, Richard said finally, his voice low, almost a whisper. I don't want to see you, I don't want to hear your voice. I need time to think. And if you have any respect for me, you'll leave me alone. Emily tried to protest, tried to argue, but she knew nothing she said would change what happened. She just nodded, silently, as Richard walked away, going up the stairs towards the bedroom. The door closed with a bang, and the sound echoed through the house like an end to everything they had experienced. But what Richard didn't yet know was that Emily's betrayal was just the tip of the iceberg. Because, as he tried to understand why the woman he loved had betrayed him, as he tried to step away to process his pain, Emily knew there was something more. Something she never confessed. Something that was about to make everything even worse. That night, Richard slept alone in the room that had once been the sanctuary of their love. And Emily, lying on the living room sofa, cried until she had no strength left. Because deep down, she knew that her mistake wasn't just any betrayal. She knew that sooner or later the truth would come out. A truth that would destroy Richard in ways he could never imagine. And the secret Emily was hiding was about to be revealed. Richard spent that night awake, staring at the ceiling, while the echoes of Emily's revelations replayed in his mind. He tried to find an answer, an explanation that made sense, but all he found was pain and anger. The memories of years of marriage played before his eyes like a movie. Every smile and gesture of affection now seemed distorted, stained by betrayal. The room he loved so much, where he felt safe, now felt suffocating, and every object seemed to mock him, silent witnesses to his humiliation. In the morning, Richard hurriedly packed a suitcase. He needed to leave the house, he needed space, he needed to get away from her. Emily watched silently from the bedroom door, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She didn't try to stop him, she just stood there, as if she knew nothing she said could stop the inevitable. I hope you can forgive me one day, she whispered, as he walked past her carrying the suitcase. Richard stopped for a moment, not daring to look back. "I doubt it," he replied dryly, and left without saying anything else. He drove aimlessly for hours, trying to find somewhere he could think. Every street he passed seemed filled with memories with Emily, and that only made the pain more intense. Finally, he found himself standing at the edge of a park he often visited when they needed a quiet place to talk or just be silent together. Richard got out of the car and sat on a bench, watching the trees sway in the wind, feeling the cold breeze on his face and trying to process everything. The following days were a mixture of confusion and despair. Richard took refuge in the home of a close friend, someone who knew about his marriage and who had always admired the couple as an example of lasting love. Upon hearing the story, the friend was stunned, not knowing what to say. "Man, I can't imagine what you must be feeling. I never thought Emily was capable of something like that," he said, as he tried to find words of comfort. Richard just nodded, staring into space. "Me neither," he murmured. "But she is. And now, I need to figure out how to move forward." But while Richard was trying to reconstruct his thoughts, Emily's life was spiraling into chaos. She knew she had destroyed what seemed like a perfect marriage, and the weight of guilt was almost unbearable. The house was empty without Richard, the silence was deafening. She walked through the rooms, looking at the photos, the furniture, the details that told the story of a life built together. A life she had ruined. Every step felt like a reminder of what she had lost. Every time she tried to occupy herself with something else, her mind went back to Richard's face as she discovered the betrayal, anger, and desperation in his eyes. Emily's phone kept ringing. Adam, the lover, was restless, trying to understand what was happening, but she didn't want to talk to him. For her, Adam was just a symptom of something she hadn't been able to face, the emptiness, the dissatisfaction with herself. But now, he was the last person she wanted to be with. Adam called, sent messages, but she didn't respond. Her focus now was on trying to find a way to fix what she had done, but she knew it was too late. Meanwhile, Richard tried to move on with his life, but the weight of betrayal followed him like a shadow. He tried to work, but he couldn't concentrate. "I tried to go out, meet other people, but everything seemed colorless, lifeless." The only thing he could do was turn over the unanswered questions in his mind. Why did she do it? When did it start? Was I so blind that I didn't realize she was unhappy? With each question, the feeling of failure suffocated him more. A week later, when Richard finally decided he needed to face the situation, sort out the practicalities of the divorce, he called Emily. "We need to talk," he said, his voice cold, emotionless. She agreed, and they arranged to meet in a quiet cafe, far from all the places they used to go together. When they met, the atmosphere was heavy, as if each person was carrying an invisible baggage of repressed feelings. The two sat in silence for a moment, trying to find the courage to say what needed to be said. Emily looked at the coffee in her cup, as if she was looking for a way to apologize again. Richard, for his part, tried to remain calm, even though every fiber of his being wanted to explode in anger. "So," he said finally, breaking the silence. "How are we going to resolve this? You know I can't be with you anymore. Divorce is inevitable." Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face again. "I know, and I accept that, Richard. But I just wanted you to understand that I'm sorry. In truth, it wasn't for lack of love. I know it sounds like I'm making excuses, but it was like I lost who I am. And Adam, he was just an escape, a way to forget for a moment the life I thought I had lost." Richard shook his head, trying not to be affected by her words. He knew that the betrayal was unforgivable, that their marriage had come to an end. But still, hearing Emily open up like that, with so much vulnerability, reminded him of the woman he once loved. "I know you're sorry, Emily," he said. "But what you did can't be erased. And I can't forgive you." As the conversation continued, the tension between them seemed to give way to a strange sense of resignation. They knew the marriage was over, but there was a kind of silent understanding of how much they had lost. Both had their share of blame, both had let the relationship slip through their fingers. But for Richard, there was still a piece missing from the puzzle. There was still something he couldn't understand, something that seemed to hang in the air like an invisible shadow. It was then that Emily, through tears and with a trembling voice, said, "There's something I need to tell you, Richard. Something I couldn't tell you before, something you need to know before you decide what to do." Richard looked at her, confused, not knowing what to expect. "What's wrong?" he asked, trying to remain calm. Emily took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. And then, finally, she told the truth she had been hiding. And it was this revelation that would change everything. Richard was silent for a few seconds, trying to understand what Emily had just said. The surrounding cafe seemed to have disappeared, and all he could hear was the sound of his own rapid breathing as her words echoed in his mind. He looked at Emily, trying to find some clue in her eyes that this was all a lie, but there was nothing but guilt and pain. She was about to confess something she had been holding onto for so long that her hands were shaking. "I'm pregnant, Richard," Emily said, almost in a whisper. Her voice was choked, and she could barely look at her husband. Richard froze, unable to process what he heard. "Pregnant," he repeated, as if saying the word out loud could make everything make sense. Is this some kind of cruel joke?" He felt the ground disappear beneath his feet, and the air around him felt like it was weighing tons. Emily shook her head, tears streaming freely down her face. I know it sounds horrible. And I didn't know how to tell you. But I needed, before any decision you make, I needed you to know. I'm pregnant, and I don't know who it's the father." Richard's world fell apart in that instant. Everything he thought he knew about life, marriage, the certainties he had, everything was swept away like a giant wave taking away everything that was in front of it. He felt like he was suffocating, like Emily's revelation was a punch to the chest. "Don't you know who the father is?" he repeated in disbelief. "You mean it could be mine, or his? This guy? Adam?" Emily just nodded, unable to utter a word. The silence that followed was so heavy that it seemed impossible to breathe. Richard stood up abruptly, knocking the chair over behind him. "I don't believe it," he said, his voice low and full of spite. "After everything, after all the lies, all the betrayals, you still throw this at me? Do you think I'll just accept this situation?" Emily reached out, trying to touch him, but Richard pulled away as if he had been burned. "Richard, please listen to me," she begged. "I know I screwed up, and I know nothing I say can change that. But I need you to know that I'm sorry, and that I don't want this child to be a consequence of all of this. I need you." "No," said Richard, with a coldness he had never felt before. "You don't need me. You made your decisions, Emily. You destroyed what we had, and now you're going to have to live with the consequences." He grabbed his things and left the cafe, leaving Emily alone, crying. As he walked the streets, Richard's mind was a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and disbelief. The revelation that he could be a father, or that his child could be someone else's, was something he never imagined he would have to face. In the months that followed, Richard disappeared completely from Emily's life. He decided to get away from everything, travel, take time for himself and think about what to do. The divorce was in progress, and he made sure it was quick and final. But the possibility of being a father still tormented him. What if it's my son, he asked himself every day. What if I'm abandoning my own blood? But the pain of thinking about raising a child through betrayal, or worse, raising another man's child, was unbearable for him. He needed answers, but he didn't know if he wanted to hear the truth. Emily, on the other hand, was alone, trying to deal with the whirlwind of feelings that surrounded her. The shame, the guilt, the constant doubt of who the father of her child would be consumed her. She knew she had made terrible choices, and she knew now she would have to face the consequences. Her pregnancy progressed, and every day she felt the weight of her mistake more, not knowing if she would be able to face everything alone. The relationship with Adam also fell apart. When he found out about the pregnancy and the doubt about paternity, he walked away, saying he didn't want to be involved in a scandal. Emily found herself without ground, without support, and about to face a motherhood full of uncertainty and pain. When the baby was finally born, Emily decided to take a paternity test, hoping that she would at least have a definitive answer about the future. When the result arrived, she held it in her shaking hands, and her breath caught in her throat. Richard was the father. The child, who she held in her arms with so much love, was the daughter of the man she had betrayed and irreversibly hurt. And now, she needed to tell him. She summoned all the courage she had and called Richard. He answered, his voice cold and distant. "Richard, the test result is your son," she said, her voice breaking. The silence on the other end of the line was suffocating. "My son?" Richard repeated, as if he was still trying to process the news. "And what do you want me to do now, Emily? You destroyed everything. And now you want me to be the father of this child as if nothing had happened?" Emily cried, begging for a chance to rebuild something, for the sake of their son. But Richard was determined. "I will support my son," he said. "I won't abandon my own blood. But as for us, there's nothing that can be fixed. Our marriage died the day you betrayed me. And that will never change." From that day on, Richard kept his word. He filed a lawsuit to have part custody of the child and provided all the necessary financial support. But he never looked at Emily like he used to. She became just the mother of his son, a shadow of a past he tried to forget. Her presence in his life was a constant reminder of pain and betrayal, but he stood firm, determined to never let her hurt him again. Emily, on the other hand, found herself condemned to live with the weight of the choices she made. She was a mother, but she felt like she would never be able to completely rebuild her life. The betrayal had left deep marks, and Richard's absence by her side was a wound that would never heal. And so, life went on for both of them, each in their own way. Richard found a way to move forward, living for his son and rebuilding his life. And Emily, although regretful, had to accept that some choices are irreversible, and that love is not always strong enough to resist betrayal. If you liked this story and got involved with the plot, leave a comment saying what you thought. We want to know your opinion. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more impactful stories like this. And remember, here, we do not support any type of betrayal.